Greetings and welcome to Stuffology, where two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is McQuarrie. I'm here with my co-host Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right, thank you. How are you doing this week?
I'm doing very well, and I think one of the reasons I'm doing very well is that I'm looking forward to talking about the song today, because it's, although perhaps not necessarily lyrically the most, upbeat and up-tempo, but actually musically it's one that carries some punch, which I really, really like. So it's going to be nice, rather than talking about some of the middling songs, shall we say, that occasionally dot A Hard Day's Night. It's nice to be returning to an old favourite in a song that is, I was going to call it All My Loving, but actually I'm going to call it Son of All My Loving.
Well, that's right. This week we are tackling Son of All My Loving, or to put it another way, things we said today. But before we get stuck in, we are persisting with this segment. You can really get a hold of us until somebody actually tells me to stop doing it. So you can contact us by email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We're on Twitter @Beatles_ology. You can find my writing at www.jgmcquarrie.scot, and you can read some of Andrew's writing at www.stuffology.co.uk. So, things we said today. What have we said today, Andrew?
We've said that this is, for me, the standout track on side two. I think side two of this album is a little bit kind of monotonous in places. I mean, good, but monotonous. But here we get something that fizzes and is just kind of bursting with life and ideas, and there's little nuggets of gold in there that make this one of those standout tracks. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. I don't think it's necessarily, although of course people will intellectualize it and talk about the whole kind of future nostalgia element of the lyrics. The thing that I really like is the way that the chorus leads back into the verse. The fact that you almost get to, you think you're getting to the end of the sentence, if you like. You think we've reached the punctuation at the end of the chorus, but actually no, it continues straight in. And so it gives it that sort of seamless feel, which also gives it a very energetic, upbeat, lively feel. And when you combine that with the fact that, despite the fact he could have done one of the things that annoys me, thanks, Paul, I really appreciate the fact that you many years before, well, a few years before I was born, decided not to do this. He didn't go screechy. He's gone very kind of subtle on his vocals on this. So, those little things just work. The fact that it's not overboard on the vocals, it's subtle, but it's meaningful. And that sort of little playing with form. Now, whether that's deliberate or whether that is, as I possibly suspect, not say laziness, but lack of time, and the fact that perhaps couldn't really be bothered to refine the lyrical feel, because actually it sounded okay, and as long as it sounds okay, we'll go with it. That seemed to be one of their mantras at that point. To be honest, it doesn't really bother me. The fact is, for whatever reason, it really works, and it really kind of packs a punch just at a point where you sort of think, oh, right, okay, we're kind of halfway through this, so we've had a couple of songs that aren't in the film, and we can see why they're not in the film. And then you get this, and you suddenly are kind of like Meerkat perking up again, going, I remember what it was like. What about you?
I also really like this song. I think it's probably also the highlight of side two of the album, although...
Uh-huh.
I mean, is there a lot of competition for that? I mean,
well, there is. There's You Can't Do That, which I think we discussed on the last episode, is a brilliant song with
rather less than brilliant lyrics.
But it is a brilliant song.
This is the whole thing, though. That's the thing. The only other one that I think really stands a chance of coming close to it. Oh no, even that's not really true. No, never mind. I think this probably is the highlight of season two. Season two, side two, even.
Which one were you thinking?
I I mean, I suppose the only other one I would say that's really in contention is maybe Any Time at All. It's got a lot of
Yeah.
energy to it. It's a pretty great song, but yeah, I don't think it could really hold a candle to things we said today. And it is that construction. It's a really really well constructed song. The idea that this kind of uh very warm lyric, really, which has, of course, yeah, like you mentioned the future nostalgia thing, but it's very warm, it's very loving, it's very very characterful, but it's not schmaltzy, it's not really overly sentimental. It's definitely not a conventional love song. That, coupled with what you mentioned about the pace of the lyrics, which don't let up, there isn't a real space for anything other than what is there. It's not the momentum and feel of the song is not broken up by unnecessarily instrumental parts. It does have the bridge or the middle eight, which does that shift up into the major, so it pulls itself out of the A minor into the A major, and that gives another.
Oh, can I ask?
Go on,
Can
go
I
on,
ask?
go on.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
As obviously you're the more musical of the two of us in terms of actually being able to play an instrument with more than one or two strings. Yeah, but bear in mind what you're talking about there. Can I just run this past you from the MacDonald book, where he says that things we said today is uncharacteristic in its ominous mood and the obsessive horizontal pull to the tonic in its melody. Does that bear any relation to what you just said?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I should need to expand on that.
Yes, please. Yes, please. I'm not throwing you under the bus
Okay.
here, honest.
All right, no, good. That's more under the entire fleet. Yeah, no, it is. So the ominousness of it, that comes from the fact that most of the song is minor. So it's A minor, E minor seventh, B flat. Those are the three main chords on the verses. So it is very minor. If you look at the other songs in the album, they're really mostly up tempo. Even well, let's see. Let's have a wee look down here. Even the stuff that isn't kind of is. But I mean, you're opening with A Hard Day's Night. I should have known better. Okay, then you've got If I Fell. Happy Just to Dance with You, and I Love Her. And I Love Her is a very traditional kind of ballad, though. So the ominousness that comes through, that is definitely something which is pretty much unique to this song, at least as far as this album is concerned. There isn't anything else that you could apply the word ominous to. You could maybe raise a question for the lyric of "You can't do that," but it's not ominous. It's just threatening. I don't know that I don't know that I would use the word ominous for it.
So
So that sure, let's go with that.
I would maybe sort of see that if there is an ominous mood, it's essentially coming from that almost relentless acoustic guitar of Lennon. It's quite nice to hear acoustic rhythm guitar played in this way, but it does add that happy strum along, and yet also, I suppose, if I take it from you, that we're dealing with minor chords, something that is a little bit more downbeat in its upbeat nature. Hang on a minute, that doesn't make any sense.
Well,
But
it's drawing attention. That's what it's
yeah,
doing. It's producing a tension between the lyrics, which have this kind of warm, kind of loving aspect to it, and this kind of this very kind of minor key kind of stuff. So that produces a tension within the song, and that's where a lot of the drama comes from in it. When he's talking about horizontal in this sense, so here we go. This now I hope I get this right, because otherwise I'll get crucified. But I'm pretty sure I'm right when I say this. The chords which are moving around in that verse, A minor, E minor, seventh, and B flat, they're all really really close to each other. So rather than jumping literally up and down the scale, so if you're looking at a musical stave, a vertical melody or a vertical chord structure would be one which is going up and down and up and down, and that's quite common with McCartney. He tends to throw in a lot of chords. It tends to be all over the stave. It tends to be something which is full of variety, lots of different bits and pieces getting chucked in. A horizontal structure only moves very little, so you're just moving like a tone up or a couple of tones up or semitone down, and that's referred to as horizontal. And that is a characteristic which is more typical of John Lennon. If you take a song like, say, "Ticket to Ride," the entirety of
Yeah.
that verse from I think I'm gonna be sad, right up until the chorus, "She's got a ticket to ride," is all on one chord. It's just an A, all of that. There's a melody that goes around it, but the chord structure is literally horizontal because there's no change in it at all if you look at it on a musical stave. So that's the difference between a horizontal and a vertical. So does
Okay.
that clarify
Well,
things?
I mean that works quite nicely, and it does suggest that he's not talking out of his backside when he goes on to say that it resembles more Lennon than McCartney. However,
Yeah,
I've
exactly.
deliberately chosen to refer to it as "Son of All My Loving," because I think it has a lot in common. I know that "All My Loving" does, if you like, veer more towards the vertical than the horizontal. Please just stick in a pretentious klaxon
Hmm.
if that's even close to being accurate. Um, but it's the feel of the song. I mean, I'm not able to talk about those kind of specifics, but I like to talk about the feel and the emotional response that you get. And it's the pace of those songs, a kind of similarity of pace and the way in which they develop and they sort of, repeat as well, that I find much more in common than, say, Ticket to Ride or Hard Day's Night, which don't have the same oomph for me as all my loving and things we said today. Now that could be because, as I've said before, I've got that familiarity with those other ones that you know in and out, whereas these ones you do know, but they're not quite as common. So there's something there that I think is worth considering. However, there's something else that, again, let's sort of give McDonald. I mean, we do sort of sometimes say McDonald's a bit of a buzzkill on the Beatles at times, but actually. Something then that you're referring to there, again, he would support, where he talks about the dramatic contrasts in things we said today as being something that becomes a lot more common in Beatles songs, and especially ones on Beatles for Sale talks about Babes in Black, Every Little Thing, Don't Want to Spoil the Party, for example. So yeah, you can definitely see that the chorus does have a dramatic shift from the verse, and I think nowhere is that more obvious than in some of the live performances. But we'll get on to talk about the live performances perhaps in a little bit. First, I just want to return to the lyrics, because although I said they don't really kind of matter that much, I think there's a reason for me why they don't matter that much. And again, it's that whole sense of the feel. And I think that McCartney had presumably got to the point where he thought, well, this says what I needed to say. I don't need to refine it. Because when you look at them, if you were to sort of look at them quite closely, there are the odd lines which just jar, which just don't seem as though they've been completely written. So you might have, "You say you'll be mine, girl, till the end of time." Okay, that's fine. "These days, such a kind girl seems so hard to find." Okay, right. There's something that's really forced about that sentence construction, and I wonder if it's just a case of on the ship out in the Caribbean, um, strumming along, getting the song right. You think, oh, that sounds good. I'll just write that down, and then never bothering to go back and to really change it. But it works, and that's such an important thing. I'll give you a modern example. I think it's a band I haven't mentioned before, but it's one who I absolutely love, and that's Teenage Fan Club, who've been through many kind of variations in terms of the way in which they styles of music. But a couple of albums ago, they had a song called "Baby Lee," which is a beautiful song. It's one of those melodies that I think you probably end up writing, going, "This has got to exist somewhere else. This can't be an original thing that I've come up with." It's absolutely wonderful. But then when you look at the lyrics, you just think, oh, this is just hogwash. Absolute hogwash. This is just a bunch of words that don't make any sense, that don't even seem to properly fit they don't even seem to properly fit they don't properly scan. And what I'll do now, what you can hear in the background is me tapping away at the keys, because what I forgot to do was bring up on the screen the actual lyrics. Here we go, folks. This is scintillating audio, isn't it? Okay, so the chorus goes, Baby Lee, I'm only trying to remind you, they had me in mind, oh yeah, when they designed you. And Baby Lee, I'm always watching from a distance, oh, marry me, oh baby, now I am insisting. It's garbage. It's absolute garbage. But it doesn't matter because the whole song works. And that's what we get here. There's too many words in there. There's a deliberate attempt just to kind of fill the line with ohs and oh yeah, oh baby, the repetition of marry, and the really awkward sentence construction. But it doesn't matter because the song's just absolutely fantastic. It's worth a listen, even if you will cringe and go, oh come on guys, couldn't you have written something better? And that's kind of how I feel when we get to those lines. Like, you know, these days such a kind girl seems so hard to find. You think, it's just a bit cringy. But you know what? It doesn't matter. Right, rant about lyrics over. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, that's quite all right. I mean, you have got a point. There are definitely a couple of lines in there which are a bit clunky. For me, it's the me, I'm just the lucky kind, and rhyming it with and though we may be blind. And though we may be blind is fine, but me, I'm just the lucky kind. That's not a thing. That's not an expression. And that maybe could have done with a wee bit of work. But again, like, it's fine. And I think the other thing, something that we haven't really mentioned yet, is the quality of McCartney's performance is also more than good enough to overcome any sort of slight lyrical hiccups. Yeah. You know, I think he really does deliver a phenomenal vocal here, and it's all him. You know, there's nobody else on the recorded version, although obviously there are in the live ones. But he's really... He's putting his heart into it, but it's not the usual kind of McCartney heart where it's, you know, very, very much being kind of, you know, worn on his sleeve in a kind of classically sort of balletic, sort of sentimental style, I suppose. Here, I mean, there's real feeling, there's real depth of emotion in this, but it's really what's driving the performance. And yeah, that does manage to overcome these little sort of slightly off-kilter lines from time to time.
I would agree. And there's an inconsistency in the lyrics as well, in terms of they're in the future they're together, or are they not together, or are they not together but wishing they were together? And when they're remembering these things that they've said, are they together remembering them, or are they apart remembering them? And what impact does it have if they're not together, and why are they not together? And again, it doesn't really matter, but I would be interested in at some point, I haven't yet, maybe, dear listener, we should do this for the sake of the authenticity, is to read the McCartney lyrics book. But my worry is that what I'm going to find is there's that sort of retrospective intellectualizing that he may possibly have done from time to time.
It's not impossible.
It's not impossible, but certainly if you look at some of those analytical websites, genius.com, where you can just post any old crap and intellectualize it, the whole thing about the lucky kind and love is luck, and though we may be blind, you know, it's like, apparently it's really clever because, like, you know, you can be both lucky in love, but also love is blind. So what he's doing there, he's contrasting those, you know, you think, okay, that's fine. If you want to think that's what he's done, rather than just sort of pulling together some words and then afterwards, fitting it to the idea that you've got, that's great. If, on the other hand, it was a genius moment that he had, you know, great. It doesn't matter to me either way. The fact is that at that point, you know, you say that you're not particularly struck on that section lyrically. I say, well, that's great, because I don't really hear the whole sentences. What I hear is the change of tempo, and I hear that sort of, you know, extra kind of beat in his voice that's really sort of saying, do you know what, this bit is the bit you need to focus on. This is where the song really sort of kicks into gear. So, you know, I hear the word lucky. I don't really hear the word kind. You know, it's just kind of the way he emphasizes it. So for me, yeah, I would agree. If I'm looking at them, black writing on a white background, and they look a bit kind of, right, yeah, sorry, you know, Wakefield Saturday Night, if you like. Not that bad, but just trying to,
you take that back, sir.
I take that back. You know, however kind of anodyne it is, it's still much better, much more cohesive than anything Roger Waters attempted to write. So there you go. So sue me, Roger. After you've obviously worried about all the other lawsuits you've got on at the moment. But it doesn't matter. It's that you hear the words you want to hear, and you get an emotional response to it. And the combination of the kick in the vocals, the kick in the rhythm, and the luck, perhaps the hard CK sound, the repetition of love. That you get in there, kind of the hard. All right, so kind and blind is a bit dull, but the fact that it ends kind blind really adds an emphasis to it just when the song needs it, as opposed to some of those line ends earlier, which dreaming, say, remember, today. They kind of drift off, but here you get kind, luck, and blind, which does add that little bit of a punch at the end because of those harder sounds at the end of the line. And it works. Oh my God, that almost sounded like analysis, didn't it?
Well, yeah. Well, we'll try and swerve away from that in a moment, because we don't want to get dragged down in anything as grubby as analysis.
Yeah, it's also
but
hypocritical as well. Bearing in mind, I'm talking about other people intellectualizing it, and here I am. Let's talk about the rhyme and the line endings. But these syllable counts.
Well, it's all right. You haven't started talking about this being McCartney's first brush with the unreliable narrator, so I think we're doing all right in that front. But I think it's also one of those times that it bears repeating. I know we've mentioned it before in the podcast, so it's not an original thing to point out.
It's not going to stop us.
I'm going to point it out again anyway, which is that lyrics aren't poetry. They're not designed to be read on the page. Performance is part of what a lyric is, and it's an important part. So the way that it's delivered, the way that it's sung is a significant, qualitative factor in how those lyrics work. And I think you're exactly right about the very hard stop and kind blind. On the page, that looks a bit flat, but when it's actually delivered as a vocal performance, it adds a punch. And you've got Ringo coming in there as well, so you've got a little bit extra on the percussion, which is helping to kind of emphasize that whole kind of that sharp staccato kind of stop on the words there. That's really, really effective. So yeah, I mean, even if I criticize slightly the line, "Me, I'm just the lucky kind," it could have been refined. Like, in terms of the performative part of it, like, it's phenomenal. It works exactly as it's supposed to.
Are you suggesting an alternative rhyme there? The lucky kind could have been refined.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on.
Yeah, I'm not going to take responsibility for rewriting McCartney.
While we're there, you mentioned the extra percussion from Ringo in that section, but let's be brutal about this. It's a tambourine, and boy, does he hammer that tambourine. Really does help, emphasize the rhythm. It's great. It's, for me, it's up there with the great cowbell moments that we've had so far. Just something different that gets thrown in that adds to the rhythm, I think is really welcome, because I think otherwise it's a very solid song for Ringo. He obviously drives the rhythm, especially when it kicks up a gear. But the tambourine, here we are talking about tambourine. What's gone wrong? It just, that extra little thing that kind of lifts it further, and it's that whole thing that we've spoken about before, about it's what's best for the song. What can we add here that is going to drive the song forward and make it even better? Let's try some tambourine. Sure.
Well, and on the outro as well, that's the other place where the tambourine really makes a difference, because it's coming in on the offbeat, and that adds a little something, just that extra little touch of drama as the song fades out, which is also just a lovely little touch. And it's one of those moments where you think most people wouldn't have thought to do that, and they did, and it just really adds something. So yeah, all praise to the tambourine. That's what I say.
Yeah. Does it not strike you then, while you mentioned that this is one of those kind of like perfect song endings as well?
Oh God, yeah, absolutely, 100%. The ending to this song is just amazing. It's such a simple thing. It shouldn't be kind of as effective as it is. But that last line, like, then we will remember things we said today, and the day is just held for that little bit longer. Then you get the acoustic. Then you get the extra tambourine coming in. It's just flawless.
Yeah. And it's interesting as well that they. It was written during a holiday in a break after the filming and after most of the songs for the album were recorded, and then it's the penultimate track that's recorded for the album, barely a month before its release. This is right at the start of June, but of course, it sort of feels like it's quite in keeping. This is where I'm gonna be a little bit of a hypocrite, because I said I feel it's more of a McCartney song than a Lennon one. But it's kind of in keeping with some of the things from side one, in particular. I should have known better. It kind of has the same, bounce and verve to it that does. So it's something that could have been in the film. It's something that you could have imagined them perhaps playing as part of their performance in the TV program section. So he seems to have written something that encapsulates the film, but obviously a little bit too late. But it still goes on side two. And the other thing then is if we're going to do the sort of like the looking forward, well, let's also bear in mind this is only 2 months before they start recording Beatles for Sale, which is just amazing. And when we were talking about Can't Buy Me Love, we talked about the fact that the recording started in Paris, and then they went to America, and all of the things that happen in America were amazing. They came back, they finished the song. So there's that kind of gap. Well, here we have them recording this song, and it comes out whilst they're on tour. So there's that, there's those gaps, the gaps of McCartney being on, or everyone being on holiday while he writes it, and then the gap after they come back, it's recorded, and the album is released, and they've been on tour. So these are busy lives that these boys are leading. It's just so stunning to think that we're still in that period where it's a case of, well, let's do this quickly. It's good enough. Oh, and by the way, good enough is just outstanding when compared to everybody else.
Well, absolutely. And that thing about looking forward as well. The other song this really reminds me of is I'm Looking Through You, which is because it's using exactly the same technique, but the other way around. So instead of it being a minor song with a warm lyric, it's a perky kind of upbeat song, but with a pretty dismissive lyric. It's basically an exact inversion of this song in terms, and to similar effect. I really like spoilers. I really like I'm Looking Through You. I think it's a fantastic song, but it's deriving its drama from exactly the same way that this song does. It's the tension between the lyrics pointing in one direction and the music pointing in another.
Note this down for future reference. I think I'm Looking Through You is the most Monkees-esque the Beatles ever get.
Okay, I shall try and remember to remind you of that when we get to Rubber Soul, and then what.
But that is a good thing, though. Actually, yeah, I think that.
Oh yeah, no, it's absolutely, of course.
Okay, so perhaps we ought to sort of start thinking about some of these other things here in relation to this song. Now, normally I spend quite a bit of time, going through cover versions, and I completely forgot this time. But I gather you have.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've been looking down just briefly secondhandsongs.com, and there are some interesting names that crop up, some huge variations. So, Cliff Richard in December 1966, for example. The King's Singers, which sounds a little bit dodgy. Some young upstart in 1990 called Paul McCartney. Dwight Yoakam. And I don't know why in 1993, I don't know what they were doing. I'm going to listen to this after we've recorded, and if I've got anything to add, I'll send you a little message. Kid Creole and the Flipping Coconuts. I mean,
absolutely.
Come on. Barbara Dickson, which I know will appeal to you, and also a Mr. Bob Dylan in November 2014. This, of course, is alongside all of the usual people we get, like Ringo Starr, for example. So what should I be listening to?
Well, the Bob Dylan one is interesting. I mean, the 2010s are a strange time for Bob Dylan to be recording just some random well, it's not random, it's on the Art of McCartney album, but it's a curious choice. I don't think you would say it was good in any meaningful sense, because it kind of sounds like he's taking the piss. It's a bit, I don't know. It doesn't quite work. But it's interesting, I suppose, to hear him singing that material. It's got a weird kind of slightly half-hearted guitar solo at the end as well, which adds precisely nothing and takes away quite a lot. So that's curious. The Barbara Dickson version, noted JG favorite Barbara Dickson, lest we forget, is really good. It's a weird kind of almost sort of trip hoppy version of it. It's got very kind of minimal sort of sketchy music background, and then just this kind of sort of pretty pure vocal over the top of it. It's a really interesting take. Why that was necessary is another question, but it's well worth a listen to. The Kid Creole version is exactly what you would expect.
and would
A
hope.
cover of Things We Said Today by Kid Creole, and as you very much say, the flipping coconuts to sound like. Which is to say, it's jolly good fun. It's also well worth a listen. But it's an interesting song in that.
Okay.
It is quite flexible in the way that it can be delivered. It's not one of, I mean, we've talked previously in the podcast about people who cover Beatles songs who basically just do straight ahead versions because some of those songs just don't really quite have enough space to do something with. That's not the case with Things We Said Today. The fact that it is obviously, written in the minor key, it's got that kind of melancholy edge to it, means that it is one that can be slowed right down without sort of detracting from it. It can be sped up, it can be done electronically, it can be done acoustically. It's an interesting song for people to cover. So it's worth diving into some of those just to have a little listen and see what can be done with it.
I will do. I mean, it's a surprising one in the sense that there's very few covers from the 60s, very few, if you like, contemporary ones.
Yeah, most of them are much more contemporary or much more recent, I
Yeah.
should say. I'm full disclosure, I haven't listened to the Cliff Richard one, so I'm unable to offer an opinion on just how bad it is.
Okay, that's fair enough. There is on secondhandsongs.com a link to a YouTube clip of it. So I'll treat myself. I will treat myself because it's yeah, that'll be interesting. I might also go listen to the Dwight Yoakam one because that's probably as exactly what I expect it's going to be. Yeah, I mean it is interesting, and maybe that says a lot about how the Beatles were thought of perhaps in the 70s as well, because I mean, if this is an exhaustive list, there's basically nothing from say 67 to 77, not a huge amount after about 81, and then it sort of kicks in again mid 90s when perhaps there was a little bit more of a revival, CD releases, McCartney being lauded by the likes of Noel Gallagher and, Paul Weller. So, you can.
An anthology, lest we forget.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but then people, much as we would have done as well, people will find the Beatles in their own way. And I suspect, therefore, that this is one of those songs that once people get past the known songs and then start diving into things beyond compilations, they'll suddenly go, yeah, right. And I mean, I can just sort of think that, when we get to Revolver, for example, I'll have half a dozen of those where, you just imagine listening to them for the first time and you sort of think, well, actually, I'd really like to be able to go back and listen to it for the first time again. And Your Bird Can Sing has been in my head quite a lot recently. I really like that. And I just think, well, it just doesn't sound like anything else I'd heard by the Beatles at that point. And although I call this Son of All My Loving, it's still something that exists kind of almost perfectly on its own as well. So, so it's one of those. It's not a, I hate the term, it's not a deep cut, but it is one of those kind of songs that people discover and fall in love with, once they get a little bit further into the Beatles, just beyond the basic compilations.
I think it's also one of those songs which, when it comes to it, I presume, I mean, this was the B-side of the single of A Hard Day's Night, so presumably it must have been extremely well known in the 60s, and it kind of entered the live show Not immediately, but it got there. So it's definitely also one that would have been presumably extremely familiar in the '60s. But maybe as time has moved forward, it's kind of fallen.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like we said, they do go on tour immediately after finishing recording for the album, because this is the tour where they do Scandinavia and the Netherlands and those sorts of places before going off to um, Australia. And this is the tour that they start without Ringo. You know, Jimmy Nicol takes over because Ringo falls ill at the end of recording. So although we do get in the set list for that world tour, we do get some songs from A Hard Day's Night actually just played a few times. So, for example, A Hard Day's Night, If I Fell, Things We Said Today, I Should Have Known Better, and I'm Happy Just to Dance With You all make the set list, but only a couple of times. Whereas I think A Hard Day's Night maybe makes it 5 times, whereas You Can't Do That is about played about 27, 28 times, and Can't Buy Me Love, along with All My Lovin' and Roll Over Beethoven, seems to make it into every single set list on the tour. Of course, Can't Buy Me Love was recorded February and March, so it had been out as a number one. So it was therefore a very known song and one that they would be able to regularly play. So that's that, presumably why it's in there. Because I wonder if because they weren't playing with Ringo, maybe they deliberately chose to go with some much more familiar songs. So you get most played songs, things like like I say, All My Loving, Roll Over Beethoven, I Saw Her Standing There, She Loves You, This Boy, Till There Was You, I Want to Hold Your Hand, Long Tall Sally, Twist and Shout. So there's a lot of very familiar songs there that Jimmy Nicol would have been able to play, but there's not a huge variety. I mean, I've pretty much covered all of the songs that they. I mean, there's a few other ones that they would have thrown in from time to time. Certainly, of course, the usual caveat: set list may not be the 100% the most reliable, but the ones that are recorded on there, we don't tend to get many outside of that kind of core element. And actually, sort of thinking about Can't Buy Me Love as well, what I find interesting looking at a few of those set lists is the way in which Can't Buy Me Love seems to work its way. It sort of jumps around in a set list, but then it seems to work its way towards the end as being something that is quite climactic. Whereas if you look at Twist and Shout could quite easily be halfway through, as it could be towards the end, if it's in there at all. And then thinking about this as a live song, Things We Said Today is kind of different as a live song, because it has, bear in mind that you don't see on these bits of film that are available, you don't see the Beatles swapping guitars. There isn't a roadie coming on with an acoustic guitar when you think, okay, right, so we know that John's going to be playing Things We Said Today and that driving line here, or bring an acoustic on, or maybe they do, but for some of the slower numbers for George to do his solo, although And I Love Her's not on the set list, so he definitely wouldn't have done that. So what you get is the electric guitar driving it, and you get some effects pedals as well, especially when you get to the up tempo sections that not just drive it, but just add something again a little different. There's a little bit of reverb on there. There's a little bit that just sounds punchier, and it's a song that really works for that. If you go back to what you were saying about covers, it really responds to different treatments. Well, that's evident here, where you've got the studio version, you've got some of the live versions from later tours to America, and you've also got a BBC version, which is quite somber, melancholic. It's definitely a more refined, and perhaps then kind of holding back on it for a deliberate reason. And that's one of the things that makes it a great song that you can do so much with.
Well, absolutely, and yeah, I think those three kind of different takes on it, just by the Beatles alone, do kind of help to to prove that. I really like the BBC version. I really like that kind of melancholic edge that it has, that kind of slightly keening air. It's really, really effective. But there's something very incisive about the live version as well when it's being driven by the electric. It's a really powerful version. But yeah, the album version is phenomenal as well. It's such a it is pretty much the midpoint between the sort of live on tour version and the live at the BBC version, but they're all great. And you can feel the band responding to the different timbres of it as they're playing towards a particular audience. It just does make it an incredibly effective little song.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because people talk about it's like a Beatles sound, and it means different things. I mean, at one point, it could almost relate to the kind of like the jingle jangle guitars of some. Then you've got the psychedelic sound, which of course just was one album, really. So it sort of means different things to different people. But if I was to think of some of the songs that typify the Beatles for me, I'd throw something like this in, because it really is sort of reminiscent of lots and lots of different things that the Beatles do, almost kind of summed up in 2.5 driving, thumping minutes. Because there's links to this, say, to Go Through to Let It Be and Two of Us, for example. I can hear echoes of the way this song was written. In it, I know they are substantially different, and someone will just be going, he knows nothing. But there's a feel to it that just kind of works. And I could probably sort of give me half an hour, I'll pick out another half a dozen songs that for me have that same kind of impact and similar sort of rhythm and changes and effects and lyrical nonsense that I could then sort of put together and say, well, this is what I mean when I say Beatlesy or some other horrific word.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, of course. But I think that also proves to be an apt point and summary for the song itself. So,
does that mean you don't want me to sit around in silence for half an hour coming up with a list of other songs? Do you not think our listener would approve of that?
I'm sure our listener singular would approve of that. Absolutely, yeah, no question about it. But
okay, right.
But for now, we need to score this one.
Hold on there for half an hour.
Let's score it. What are you going to give this one?
Oh, right. Okay, so decision time. It's Beatlesy. It's All My Loving-y. It's I think I'm going to go with for me a very high 8 out of 10.
8 out of 10. Excellent. Good. I'm either 7.5 or 8. Blah blah blah. I don't know. I probably should have thought of this in advance. I'm going to give it 8.
Thank you.
I do
Otherwise,
really
I'll call for your resignation.
Yeah, I do really like it. I think it's a great little piece, and I don't know. Is there any point in describing a Beatles song as underrated or underappreciated at this point? There probably isn't, because there isn't. I'm sure I mean, people appreciate everything, so probably not. But
well, I think no, but I think it is worth saying, because obviously there will be those classics, and there'll be people who say that say Hey Jude is now overrated, but people won't hold songs like this in the same esteem as they hold say Strawberry Fields, or even I'm the Walrus, maybe. But I think it deserves to be considered alongside a lot of those.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it is. I think it is one that deserves to have a little bit more light shone on it. So yeah, I'm very glad that we've been able to do so.
Yeah, about 40 minutes of shining.
40 minutes of shining. What more could you possibly want from some random Beatles podcast? All right, fine. Let's call it there and leave it for now. As mentioned at the start of the episode, you can get a hold of us. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com, and we would really love to hear from you and what you think of the show, what works and what doesn't. You can provide us with the same information should your heart feel that it is drifting in that general direction. On Twitter, we are Beatles Beatles_ology. You can find my writing at www.jgmcquarrie.scot and Andrew's at www.stuffology.co.uk. Also, please check out my other podcast, which is Talking Trek to You, where a noob and an expert, me allegedly, go through the original episode series by series. Episode by episode, series by series. God, we're going to be at this forever. Anyway, please like, rate, and review us on whatever podcast you're using so that more people can find the show. So next episode, of course, we carry on with the second side of A Hard Day's Night, which means we're going to be covering When I Get Home. And as always, we hope you're going to join us for it. But until then, keep listening.